Hello everybody, this is Manu S and welcome to another Eternal Top Decks video series. So it's time to finally talk about Stonescar Gunslingers. First of all, we first had the pistol buff 2 patches ago, and in the last patch we got a secret buff to Champion of Chaos by turning it into a Gunslinger. But let me briefly go into the history of that deck, or like my history with the deck. Basically, when set 3 came out, I brewed my first like sort of Madness Ashara aggro deck, trying to see if we can fit some Combust and Madness into an aggro deck, because Combust is super efficient and kills any threat that might stall you out, which is really good, and Madness has the upside of impairing combat really heavily for the opponent, dealing damage and still being sort of like a slay if you can make sure that you can get rid of the unit afterwards reliably enough. So yeah, I wanted to mess around with Ashara, Madness, and Combust, and I think I had like 2 pistols in there because you have a bunch of Gunslingers, so you could support some. But the deck felt like only okay and not that appealing back then, so I kind of gave up on it. And then the pistol buff happened, and I went back to it and yeah, talked to Patrick Dickman. So we talk a lot about the game recently, as you noticed in the last deck text. I was like, hey, I want to like work on Stonescar Gunslingers with the pistol buff and everything, and Grenadins and Highwayman being so well positioned as they were at it like 2 weeks ago or so, and still basically are mostly. And then yeah, I like showed him what I roughly had, and we talked about a couple things and adjusted some numbers, and the final list that we came up with on our first brewing basically was the list that level 13 David used last week to top 8 the ETS. He just took the very first version that I posted in our Discord after going on like a pretty good run with it, and yeah, he like last minute, 10 minutes before registration ended, threw together a sideboard and registered it, so he had no time to talk to me about like an update and changes to the deck, which I made by then. And this weekend, with the new Gunslinger change to Champion, which arguably is the most impactful change in the entire patch, as weird as that sounds, the deck is running rampant on ladder, and childroland won the ETS with a list that's like 4 cards different from the list David used last week. Childroland basically just cut an assembly line, the 2 Drakes, which are now unplayable, and 1 Sabotage for 4 champions, which is a very reasonable change. But, sorry about that. But yeah, let's talk about the deck now, since we changed, made a couple changes since then, and Champion, of course, also made it into the deck. So let's see. Alright, so this is the current list. The changes basically being no more Sabotage. Sabotage was like okay, but a bit underwhelming and probably is better in the sideboard, since yeah, it just was very hit or miss, and a lot of the time could have just been like another generic card that can trade with opponent's cards. It just didn't do anything like past just trading with an opponent's card at like no specific like upside. So having like a bit more proactive or flexible cards than Sabotage seemed a bit better. I'm not 100% sure yet on that change, but fairly certain, since it also allows us to run 4 Madness, because the Devours basically took the place of Sabotages, allowing us to go up to 4 Madness. And since this deck is not your typical aggro deck, the deck is more like an aggressive version of the Felnscar Scream deck in a way. The deck plays much more aggro controlling and just basically is a bunch of good threats and cards that deal with everything, and cards that are particularly well positioned right now and are awkward for opponents. Like the Grenadins are very awkward for a lot of decks to deal with. Like the control decks have a hard time dealing with a bunch of Grenadins. They have to like use their harsh rules to do that and stuff. And Chargers are also really good against a lot of the removal that is running around, and the Grenadins allow you to play Combusts and Devours because you have good fodder even if you don't have a Madness. And the way the deck plays out, Devour is actually still pretty good at like just sacking a guy that's getting killed or just throwing away a Grenadin. But obviously it's mainly meant to combo with Madness, allowing us to go up to 4. Another change is less Asharas. Ashara actually is a bit hit or miss, like she can be quite awkward, because the problem is, say if you play a 2-drop and then an Ashara, since you don't have any Grenadins, and then on turn 4 you don't have a Charger, for example, you cannot attack unless you want to lose your 2-drop, because then Ashara attacks, and you just eat your 2-drop, or you only attack for 3 and one of your units is kind of blanked. And that happened a fair share, like also with double Asharas. Having like 2 Asharas in play as your only unit and stuff, it's just pretty awkward. And even though the deck is not hyper aggressive, missing out on attacks because you only have Ashara plus another unit is really awkward. And now that we have Champion, we don't need that many Asharas anymore, and now that we have Devour, so we don't need that many Asharas anymore as a Gunslinger or as an enabler for Madness. But the card is still good, it's just a bit situational and can be weird in multiples, which is why we decided to go down to 2. There's potential that 3 is fine. The problem is though that we already have like 10 3-drops as it is, and the 4 Madness, which also costs 3, although they are usually a turn 4 or turn 5 play, so they don't really count, they just cost 3, but they're not a turn 3 play. So going past 10 3-drops that you want to play on turn 3 is a lot and fairly clunky, so for now 2 Asharas is fine, because we also have the Deadly from Champion and the Heavy Hitter from Champion. Pistol got a lot better now because Champion can usually kill anything with a pistol, which is super powerful, and then be like a 7-3 overwhelmed Deadly, so if the opponent trades they take 6, and Bandit Queen makes it a nightmare and so on. And yeah, deck runs 26 power. Due to the lack of 1-drops, partially because of Instigator and also because the 1-drops curving poorly with Instigator and the other 1-drops being kind of so-so positioned and the deck not being that hyper aggressive that you really want them. You can afford to run 4 Crests, which normal aggro deck couldn't, which is nice, because then you have 26 power with 4 Crests. Together with the Devours, giving you a reasonable chance to hit your 4 and 5 power when you need them without flooding out too much. We figured the deck can afford to run like 2 to 3 Granite Waystones. Currently I'm on 2 because the deck really wants its seeds to be ready, because if your Crests and your seeds are depleted a lot, your draws can get really slow and clunky, which is not so nice. So 2 Waystones is a reasonable amount. They still synergize really well with the sack cards, Ashara, and the Bandit Queen, or just as like a trump blocker or an annoying free threat against control. It's just nice to have them in a deck that has so much synergies with a random 1/1 for free. And yeah, the assembly line package is extremely important against removal heavy decks, and also to make Bandit Queen powerful enough. The deck can race really, really well with the Grenadin army plus Bandit Queens. Had some impressive games where I just was losing a race, but if I top deck a queen, I just win the game, hitting my opponent for like 20 plus in one turn when being raced by like life stealers like Whirling Duo and stuff that I couldn't kill, or like commandos in the air, especially like double commando and stuff. So it's pretty powerful. Yeah, pistol is just so good now. Champion becoming a gunslinger is a big, big deal. And yeah, the deck has been doing really well for me on ladder. I'm, I think, at like 63% or something, after having had like a bad run in between and being at 120 games. Yeah, I'm like 75-45 over 120 games. So as you can see, I played the deck a lot, so I have a lot of insight and testing under my belt with the deck. And I also like wanted to play this deck yesterday in the ETS, but I kind of passed out because I hadn't slept too much and ended up missing the check-in. Didn't end up playing. But yeah, childroland 1 with the slightly different, slightly outdated version. He cut an assembly line, which I would definitely not recommend. Ashara is much worse than assembly line. Assembly line is so good with Ashara, with Devour, with Combust, with Queen against removal. The Grenadin drone and assembly line package is so good, I think. It's really, really good against other aggro decks, especially Skycrag, and also just really good against control. It's only not that great against mid-range, theoretically, but practically it kind of is, because this deck has so much removal that you can usually keep the board clear enough for assembly line tokens to just attack freely. Between Madness, Combust, and Hideout Pistol and Torch, the deck has so many ways to kill opposing blockers that it's really hard for them to establish a board to eat up your Grenadins, and at the same time, since it's Grenadins, they also don't really have a chance at stopping our pressure from pressuring them with their removal, because removal is also useless against them. So Grenadin drones backed up by ways to keep the board small or clear are extremely powerful, and it's a big part of the strength of the deck, actually. The other part is just like the 4-drop chargers, the Madness package, and the pistol, filled out by a bunch of random threats that work with pistol and sort of do the job. But yeah, the heart of the deck is the 8 chargers, the Grenadin package, the pistols, and the Madness package. This is like the 3 essential parts of the deck. The rest is just like fill material, even champion. It's just a bunch of units that are determined by functioning with pistol and filling out the curve, basically, and being the best in the curve slots. But they're not like super essential, because they the Gunslingers will a lot of the time just die to opposing removal without even getting any damage in, which is fine. That's what we have the Chargers and the Grenadins for in the end. And yeah, this is, I think, easily the best new Stonescar aggressive deck, and one of the best decks in the game right now, if not the best deck after the change to Champion of Chaos. Ladder is full of it, and the deck feels really powerful. The change to Champion might have actually sort of been too much, because the deck already was really powerful before, and with Champion now it might be almost too good again, but we'll have to see. It feels really nasty to play against that deck. The tempo swings from pistols and madnesses and stuff, and the chargers are just really, really hard to swallow with most decks. So we'll see. But yeah, this is the list. We also registered this list for the Team League playoffs, so it's one of our 3 decks. So we really believe that it's already believed before the champion change and before yesterday that this is one of the best decks to bring for the Team League, and the change to champion just made it better. Alright, as usual, gonna hop into some games to show it in action, show you how it plays out, because the deck is a bit different and a bit more tricky than your usual aggro deck. It has a lot of subtleties to it, which makes it even better and even more interesting and fun to play, if you ask me. Alright, stay tuned for the games coming up.